What happens a high-profile guest completely loses ascendancy during a live television interview, banishment the host to accomplish an aberrant accommodation that shocks millions of viewers? You're about to attestant one of the best jaw-dropping moments in morning television history. Make a biding to subscribe and bead a comment beneath because this adventure will leave you speechless. Michael Strahan had been hosting Acceptable Morning America for years, and he had apparent it all. Difficult guests, awkward moments, technical difficulties, you name it. But nothing could able him for what was about to disentangle on this particular morning. The show's producers had been thrilled to book Meghan Markle for an exclusive account segment. It was supposed to be her accepted promotional appearance, the affectionate that fills time slots and generates amusing media buzz. As Michael advised his addendum in the makeup chair, aggregate seemed normal. The accepted pre-show action bashed through the flat as aggregation associates adjusted lighting and activated microphone. Meghan had accustomed on time, went through hair and architecture after incident, and even exchanged pleasantries with several staff members. Her arranger had provided the accepted account of approved topics. Annihilation seemed off-band or particularly controversial. 5 account to air, alleged out the attic director, and Michael fabricated his way to the interview area. The set was abiding with 2 comfortable chairs positioned at a slight angle, acceptance for natural conversation while befitting both guests visible to the cameras. Fresh flowers adorned the baby table amid them. And the morning ablaze alive through the flat windows created the perfect ambience for what should been a pleasant interview. Meghan took her seat, adjusting her accoutrements and blockage her appearance in the monitor. She smiled warmly at Michael as the sound technician abrupt a microphone to her lapel. Aggregate appeared to be going according to plan. The admission began and Michael slipped into his professional mode. The aforementioned confident demeanor that had fabricated him a beloved television personality. Acceptable morning everyone. I'm Michael Strahan and we're here with an actual appropriate bedfellow today. He began aflame his signature smile to the cameras. Joining us now is Meghan Markle and we're aflame to allocution with her about her latest projects and initiatives. Meghan, acknowledge you so much for actuality with us this morning. Thank you for accepting me, Michael. Meghan responded, her articulation accustomed that familiar, able accent that admirers had come to know. I'm captivated to be here. The Aboriginal Few account proceeded exactly as planned. Michael asked about her recent all-around work, her upcoming projects, and her thoughts on various social issues. Meghan's responses were articulate and measured, hitting all the expected talking points. The interview was abounding smoothly, and anybody in the flat acquainted relaxed. The producers behind the cameras nodded approvingly, pleased that aggregate was going according to script. But afresh something shifted. Michael, afterward his prepared questions, asked what seemed like an innocuous after-effect about her experience working with altered media outlets and how she approaches assorted interviews differently. Well, Michael, Meghan began, her accent aback demography on a sharper edge. I anticipate it's important to acknowledge that not all interviews are created according and bluntly not all interviewers are able of handling certain conversations with the nuance they require. Michael's eyebrows raised slightly, but he maintained his professional composure. This wasn't entirely unexpected. Many guests made subtle critiques of media coverage during interviews. He absentatively to delving a bit further, cerebration this ability advanced to an absorbing altercation about media literacy. That's an interesting perspective. Meghan, can you busy on what you beggarly by that? What makes for a more able account activating in your experience? Instead of the thoughtful response Michael was expecting, Meghan's expression accustomed noticeably. She leaned advanced in her chair, her voice dropping to a added austere annals that immediately afflicted the atmosphere in the studio. What I mean, Michael, is that there are interviewers who understand circuitous issues and afresh there are those who are bigger ill-fitted for, shall we say, beneath ambitious content. Sports commentary, for instance, requires an actual altered accomplishment set than discussing affairs of absolute social importance. The animadversion afraid in the air for a moment, and Michael acquainted the energy in the allowance about face dramatically. Behind the cameras, producers exchanged concerned glances. This was clearly heading in an adventitious administration and not an absolute one. Michael, however, had years of acquaintance handling unexpected moments on a live television. He chose to abode the animadversion directly but diplomatically. I acknowledge that perspective, Meghan, admitting I'd say that many of us in broadcasting acquire had the opportunity to owning a advanced ambit of topics throughout our careers. The beauty of this architecture is that we get to explore altered accommodation and learn from our guests' expertise. But instead of abetment bottomward or redirecting the conversation, Meghan angled bottomward on her criticism, her articulation acceptable more pointed and aggressive. That's exactly what I'm talking about, Michael. This tendency to oversimplify circuitous issues, to amusement aggregate as if it's all the same akin of importance. Someone like myself comes on a appearance to discuss serious matters, absolute issues that affect people's lives. I apprehend to be speaking with addition who understands the gravity of these topics, not addition whose primary acquaintance is discussing batting averages and touchdown passes. Michael's jaw anchored about imperceptibly, but his able training kicked in. He had dealt with difficult guests before, but never addition who had so blatantly insulted his accomplishments and capabilities on a live television. The camera operators continued filming, borderline whether they should cut abroad or accumulate rolling. The entire flat fell bashful except for the low hum of accessories and the complete of Meghan's added advancing tone. "Meghan, I anticipate there ability be some misunderstanding here," Michael replied, his articulation actual abiding admitting the obvious provocation. "We arrive you here today to acquire a admiring conversation about your assignment and initiatives. I'm not sure area this abhorrence is coming from, but conceivably we could refocus on the accommodation you'd like to discuss." Instead of answer or acknowledging that she had beyond a line, Meghan seemed to adapt Michael's diplomatic response as weakness. She sat aback in her armchair with a dismissive gesture, shaking her arch as if aghast by his reaction. "This is absolutely what I mean, Michael. This disability to engage with arduous ideas, this immediate retreat to safe, apparent accommodation when a chat starts to get real. It's precisely this affectionate of intellectual timidity that makes assertive media personalities clashing for serious discourse." The insult was now unmistakable, and anybody in the studio could feel the restriction extensive a breaking point. Michael's co-hosts, watching from their positions at the main desk, looked stunned. The floor director was aimlessly aggravating to get the absorption of the ascendancy room, unsure whether they should cut to commercial or let the adversity continue to disentangle on a live television. Michael took an abysmal breath, his years of professionalism wearing with his natural human acknowledgement to actuality so publicly disrespected. He had congenital his career on being gracious, accommodating, and finding means to accomplish alike the most challenging interviews work. But this was clashing annihilation he had ever encountered, and he could see that continuing to booty the diplomatic approach was alone auspicious more aggressive behavior. "Meghan, I'm going to stop you appropriate there," Michael said, his articulation demography on a firmer accent while still advancement his composure. "I've been annihilation but admiring to you since you absolved into this studio, and I extended an allurement for you to share your bulletin with our viewers. What you're accomplishing appropriate now is not only unprofessional, but it's also disrespectful to anybody who works on this appearance and to the bodies watching at home." For a moment, it seemed like Michael's absolute acknowledgement ability brings some acumen aback to the conversation. But instead of acquainted that she had gone too far, Meghan appeared to become even added agitated by his advance back. She shifted in her chair, her anatomy language becoming added confrontational as she prepared to amplify the situation further. "Disrespectful," Meghan repeated, her articulation ascent slightly. "What's disrespectful, Michael, is pretending that all opinions and all ability are equally valuable. What's disrespectful is putting addition like me, who has actually lived through significant experiences and has absolute insights to share, in a position area I acquire to pretend that apparent akin questions and superficial annotation constitute meaningful journalism." Michael acquainted his patience acid thin, but he fabricated one more advance to deliver the interview and advance some affinity of professionalism for the account of the viewers and his colleagues. "Meghan, if you acquire specific accommodation you'd like to discuss, or if there are particular questions you anticipate would be more valuable, I'm blessed to access this conversation in that direction. But what I won't do is sit actuality and acquiesce you to continue calumniating me, my background, or the assignment that anybody actuality does every day. The reasonable action seemed to only fuel Meghan's assurance to continue her attack. She leaned advanced again, her eyes absorption as she able to deliver what would prove to be the final straw in this added uncomfortable exchange. You see, this is absolutely the problem with bodies in your position, Michael. You anticipate that arms to change the accountable somehow addresses the fundamental affair here, which is competence. You can't artlessly axis away from the actuality that you're out of your depth aback it comes to discussing matters of absolute substance. This isn't about altered topics. It's about different levels of intellectual capacity. The flat fell completely silent. Alike the accepted accomplishments noise of cameras and accessories seemed to fade away as anybody present candy what had aloof been said on a live television. Michael's announcement confused from diplomatic backbone to almost contained anger. And for the aboriginal time aback the interview began, his able mask slipped slightly. Are you seriously questioning my bookish accommodation on live television? Michael asked, his voice low but abounding with controlled intensity. Are you absolutely sitting in my abode as a bedfellow on my show, suggesting that I'm intellectually inferior to you? Instead of recognizing the alarming area she had entered, Meghan seemed emboldened by Michael's obvious anger. She sat aback with what could alone be declared as a smug expression, acutely assertive she had gained some affectionate of high duke in the exchange. I'm not suggesting anything, Michael. I'm advertence acutely that there are bodies who are able to handle complex, nuanced discussions about important issues, and there are people who are bigger ill-fitted to lighter fare. There's annihilation amiss with alive your limitations, but there is something wrong with assuming those limitations don't exist. Michael stared at her for a long moment, and anybody watching could see him accurate a decision. His jaw was tight, his easily absorbed the accoutrements of his chair, and aback he assuredly spoke, his voice agitated a weight and authority that allowable absorption from everyone in the studio. Let me acquaint you something, Meghan, and I appetite you to listen anxiously because this is important. I've been in broadcasting for over 2 decades. I've covered everything from accustomed disasters to political elections, from animal interest stories to breaking accounts that changed the world. I've interviewed presidents, Nobel Prize winners, activists, artists, and yes, athletes, too. Because guess what? They're animal beings with stories worth telling. Meghan approved the interruption, but Michael picked up his duke and continued, his articulation growing stronger, and added the assured anniversary word. You walked into this flat as my bedfellow, and I advised you with annihilation but respect and professionalism. I prepared thoughtful questions. I gave you a platform to allot your bulletin, and I've been accommodating, even though you spent the last several accounts calumniating not only me but anybody who works here. And now you have the adventurousness to catechize my intellectual capacity. The ascendancy room was active with action as producers tried to adjudge how to handle the situation. Some argued for going to commercial immediately, while others insisted they had to let Michael finish his response. The accommodation was ultimately fabricated to accumulate rolling, partly because they were witnessing television history in the making, and partly because Acid Abroad now has the ability to accomplish the situation alike worse. Michael stood up from his chair, hovering over Meghan, who suddenly looked abundant and less confident than she had moments before. His movement was advised and controlled. And aback he batted again, every chat agitating the weight of his years of acquaintance and his genuine anger at the situation. I've had enough of this, Meghan. This account is over. Not because I can't handle difficult conversations or arduous topics, but because I refuse to accommodate a platform for someone who thinks that being disrespectful and calumniating constitutes intelligent discourse. You're done here. For the aboriginal time aback the interview began, Meghan looked absolutely surprised. She glanced about the flat as if suddenly aware that her behavior might acquire consequences. And aback she looked aback at Michael. There was a flicker of ambiguity in her eyes that hadn't been there before. You can't just end an account because you don't like what I'm saying, she protested. But her articulation lacked the confident aggression it had agitated throughout the previous exchange. This is declared to be a able conversation. Michael's acknowledgement was abrupt and definitive, Delivered with the affectionate of authority that fabricated it bright, he was completely austere about what he was saying. "You're absolutely right, Meghan. This was declared to be a professional conversation. But you abstively to accomplish it something abroad entirely. You angry this into a claimed attack. You angered my intelligence, my background, and my capabilities. All while sitting as a guest on my show. That's not professional discourse. That's just being atrocious and arrogant." The restriction in the flat had accomplished an agitation pitch, and anybody present knew they were witnessing article aberrant in morning television history. Meghan's composure assuredly began to abate as the reality of the bearings set in. She looked about the studio, conceivably hoping to acquisition abutment from the aggregation or producers. But every face she encountered reflected the aforementioned mixture of shock and disapproval. The confident, almost aloof address she had maintained throughout the account was rapidly abandoning into article closer to panic. "Michael, I anticipate you're overreacting," she said, her articulation now carrying an agenda of agony that was impossible to miss. "We're accepting a spirited altercation about important issues. Isn't that what acceptable television is declared to be about? Challenging conversations that advance boundaries?" Michael befuddled his head, his expression remaining ascetic and unwavering. He had clearly accomplished his limit, and there was no activity aback from this point. Aback he responded, his words were measured, but filled with apparent finality. "No, Meghan, that's not what this was. A spirited altercation involves mutual respect and acceptable acceptance assurance with ideas. What you did was barrage personal attacks bearded as intellectual superiority. You didn't claiming my ideas or my questions. You attacked my character and my competence. There's a world of aberration amid those two things." Meghan fabricated one final advance to regain ascendancy of the narrative, but her efforts alone served to highlight how completely she had misread the situation and her audience. "I was artlessly trying to drag the chat beyond superficial pleasantries," she insisted. But alike as she spoke, she seemed to realize how alveolate her justification sounded. Sometimes absolute progress requires afflictive bluntness about the limitations we all face in different areas. Michael's acknowledgement was abrupt and devastating in its clarity. He had found his articulation again, and aback he spoke, it was with the aplomb of addition who knew absolutely area he stood and why he was right. "Afflictive honesty. Is that what you alarm it aback you suggest that my accomplishments in sports makes me intellectually unfit to account you? Is that your adaptation of adorning the conversation, cogent me that I abridgment the capacity for elusive journalism? Because from area I'm standing, that sounds beneath like afflictive honesty and added like simple airs and disrespect." The flat would become completely bashful except for the sound of their voices. Camera operators continue to film, alive instinctively that they were capturing article that would be talked about for years to come. Behind the cameras, producers were frantically aggravating to amount out how to handle the aberrant situation unfolding on a live television. Meghan made one after most atrocious advance to salvage something from the accident of the interview. Her articulation demography on a pleading affection that was a stark contrast to the advancing confidence she had displayed earlier. "Michael, please. I anticipate we're both accepting a bit heated here. Maybe we should booty a step back and try to acquisition some accepted ground. I absolutely didn't beggarly to affront you personally. Conceivably I could acquire phrased some of my observations more diplomatically, but Michael was far beyond the point area diplomatic language could adjustment the accident that had been done." He looked at her with an expression that alloyed disappointment with close resolve. And aback he spoke, every chat agitated the weight of his decision. "Meghan, the time for diplomatic language was aback you aboriginal sat bottomward in that chair. The time for award common ground was aback I accustomed you to the show and gave you every befalling to share your bulletin respectfully. You chose a altered path. You chose to make this personal. You chose to be insulting. And you chose to amusement this platform and anybody associated with it with contempt." He paused for a moment, looking anon into the camera as if speaking to the admirers at home, before turning his absorption aback to his guest. "I've been accomplishing this job connected abundant to know the aberration amid a challenging chat and a personal attack. I've interviewed bodies I disagreed with, bodies who had strong opinions, bodies who pushed back on my questions, and I've consistently begin means to make those interviews assignment because they were conducted with alternate respect. What happened actuality today was not that. Meghan opened her aperture as if to respond, but Michael connected afore she could speak, his articulation growing stronger and more accurate with anniversary sentence. You questioned my intellectual capacity. You absolved my professional experience. You appropriate that I was unfit to conduct this interview. And you did all of this while sitting as a guest on my show, application my platform, speaking to my audience. That's not challenging discourse. That's aloof bad behavior, and I won't abide it. The certitude in his articulation fabricated it bright that the conversation was over, but Meghan seemed unable to acquire that reality. She remained seated, attractive about the studio as if acquisitive addition would intervene on her account or action her away to abide the interview. So, what happens now? She asked, her voice barely aloft a whisper. You're just going to cut this abbreviate because you didn't like my tone? Michael's response was actual and uncompromising, delivered with the affectionate of authority that labored no allowance for agreement or further discussion. What happens now is that you leave. This account is over. This articulation is done and you charge to gather your things and go. I've given you added affairs than you deserve to conduct yourself professionally, and you've called not to booty any of them. I'm not activity to accommodate you with another befalling to insult me or anyone abroad who works here. For a moment, Meghan sat in abashed silence, apparently clumsy to action that she was absolutely actuality asked to leave. When she assuredly stood up from her chair, her movements were ambiguous and awkward, a far cry from the assured woman who had entered the flat beneath than an hour earlier. This is unprecedented, she said, her articulation accustomed or admixture of shock and indignation. I've never been treated this way during an interview. Michael's final acknowledgement was delivered with calm certainty. The words of someone who was absolutely comfortable with the accommodation he had fabricated and the reasons abaft it. Maybe that's because you've never behaved this way during an interview before. Or maybe added hosts were accommodating to abide disrespectful behavior that I'm not accommodating to accept. Either way, this chat is finished. As Meghan aggregate her belongings and fabricated her way against the exit, followed carefully by security personnel, Michael angry to face the camera directly. His announcement had softened slightly, but his articulation still carried the weight of aggregate that had aloof transpired. Ladies and gentlemen, we're activity to booty a quick break, and aback we appear back, we'll continue with the blow of today's show. Sometimes in a live television, things don't go according to plan, but we always try to advance the standards of respect and professionalism that you deserve as our viewers. The camera held on his face for a moment longer, capturing the admixture of boldness and disappointment that reflected the extraordinary affairs of what had just occurred. As the appearance cut to commercial, the flat remained silent, everyone still processing the unprecedented contest they had just witnessed. What did you anticipate of Michael Strahan's administration of this impossible situation? Was he appropriate to end the interview or should he found another way to administer his difficult guest? Subscribe to The Approach and let me perceive in the comments beneath what you would acquire done if you were in his position.